everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be decoding the high-yield immunology and clinical algorithms of celiac disease, specifically tailored for your medical board prep. So whether you're gearing up for the USMLE, NEET PG, or honestly just looking to sharpen your clinical acumen on the wards, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're looking at exactly how a single stubborn gluten peptide triggers an autoimmune cascade that literally destroys the intestinal lining, and more importantly, how you as a clinician need to step in to diagnose it accurately.
Here is our quick clinical roadmap for today. We'll systemically master this condition by walking through a classic patient presentation, breaking down the underlying immune cascade, laying out the diagnostic algorithm, dodging a very common testing trap, and finally, wrapping up with essential board exam synthesis.
All right, let's dive right in by anchoring our learning with a classic clinical vignette.
Meet our patient, Miss Ananya Sharma. She's a 24-year-old IT professional from Bengaluru who presents with chronic diarrhea, a 5-kilogram unintentional weight loss, and some pretty concerning labs. She eats a daily wheat-based diet of rotis and parathas. Now, notably, her mother has Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which gives us a big hint about a clustering autoimmune susceptibility in the family. Her labs show a hemoglobin of 9.2 that's totally refractory to oral iron, and her tTG-IgA is sitting at a sky-high 112.
So, before we jump the gun and start treating based on these glaring lab abnormalities, I really want you to ask yourself, what is the single most critical next step in her management? It is incredibly tempting to just tell her to stop eating wheat right this second, isn't it? But as you'll see, doing that would be a massive clinical error. To understand exactly why the right next step matters so much, we first need to dive deep into the gut lumen and decode the underlying immune cascade.
The pathogenesis essentially kicks off when the highly indigestible 33-mer Gliadin peptide manages to survive all of our digestive enzymes. This thing is rich in proline and glutamine, making it incredibly stubborn against our gastric, pancreatic, and brush border enzymes. It leverages a protein called zonulin to actually increase gut permeability, allowing it to slip right through the tight junctions and breach the epithelial layer. And once it's inside, tissue transglutaminase 2, or tTG2, gets straight to work converting that glutamine to glutamic acid. This infiltration process is wild. You can see how the peptide slips into the lamina propria and gains a really strong negative charge, which is what primes the immune system. Zonulin basically kicks the door open in the epithelial layer. And that deimidation by tTG2, it gives the peptide a super high affinity for HLA molecules, completely setting the stage for an immune attack.
Now here is where the cellular battleground really heats up. Antigen-presenting cells display this altered peptide specifically to CD4+ T helper cells using HLA-DQ2 or DQ8. This genetic step is absolutely vital to understand, guys, because it explains why over 95% of celiac patients carry those specific HLA-DQ2 or DQ8 genes. The T helper cells then unleash a massive storm of cytokines. We're talking interferon gamma, IL-21, IL-15. This cytokine storm drives B cells to produce the very tTG and EMA antibodies we measure in our labs, while simultaneously recruiting killer cells, specifically intraepithelial lymphocytes, to ruthlessly destroy our own enterocytes.
This microscopic warfare results in two hallmark histological changes you absolutely must recognize for your boards: crypt hyperplasia and progressive villous atrophy. Basically, because the mature enterocytes on the villi are being destroyed, the crypts below have to go into complete overdrive. They enlarge and multiply in this desperate attempt to replace the lost cells. But they just can't keep up, and that leads to the progressive flattening of the villi. You're going to see these exact inflammatory changes graded clinically on the Marsh Classification spectrum. It ranges from a normal, uninflamed mucosa all the way down to complete villous flattening, which is Marsh 3C. And keep in mind, progression isn't always linear. A patient might stall at Marsh 1 or 2 for literally years, where you only see raised IELs and crypt hyperplasia while the villi structurally hold on. But by the time they hit Marsh 3A, 3B, and 3C, you see that unmistakable blunting and shortening that severely impairs nutrient absorption.
Okay, so we understand the pathology causing the damage. Now let's look at how we diagnose it clinically without making a catastrophic error.
The most crucial takeaway here is avoiding the wrong approach. Specifically, never ever start a gluten-free diet before testing. Why? Because mucosal healing will cause false negative biopsies and serologies. If you take away that 33-mer Gliadin peptide before taking a biopsy, the enterocytes heal up, the antibody titers drop, and you completely miss the diagnosis. Also, please never just label a patient with chronic diarrhea as having IBS without running basic serology first. And remember, mild villous blunting can be incredibly subtle, so always take biopsies even if the white light endoscopy looks perfectly normal to the naked eye.
Instead of all that, you want to follow the gold standard ACG guidelines. It's simple. Keep the patient on a gluten diet, check the serology, confirm it with duodenal biopsies, and only initiate treatment after confirmation. For our patient, Ananya, this meant making sure she kept eating her daily rotis while we ran her tTG-IgA. Because she followed step 1, her biopsy came back clearly confirming a Marsh 3B stage. Only then, with hard evidence in hand, do we start the lifelong strict gluten-free diet.
Let's move on to a massive board exam favorite and see how this builds into our specific serology testing strategy. So your absolute first-line test is the highly sensitive tTG-IgA, but here's the kicker. You must always pair it with a total IgA level to act as your crucial quality control. tTG-IgA is incredibly sensitive, sitting right around 95%, making it the perfect initial screen. Now, antibodies like EMA or anti-endomysial antibody act as your highly specific confirmer test, and they're often used if that initial serology is equivocal. And what about HLA-DQ2/DQ8 typing? That is your ultimate rule-out test due to its extremely high negative predictive value.
Now, if you forget to order that total IgA, you are going to fall right into the IgA trap. Since 2 to 3% of celiac patients have selective IgA deficiency, you have to seamlessly switch to the IgG backup panel to avoid missing the disease entirely. This is a classic USMLE or NEET PG vignette, guys. Imagine a young patient with textbook celiac symptoms, but their tTG-IgA comes back completely negative. If you didn't check their total serum IgA, you wouldn't realize their body simply cannot make IgA antibodies at all. You have to immediately switch your panel to deaminated gliadin peptide IgG or tTG-IgG to find the hidden disease.
Now, celiac disease doesn't just stay in the gut, so let's briefly look at the systemic complications you have to keep on your radar. You must never miss extraintestinal red flags, like the pathognomonic dermatosis herpetiformis rash. That intensely itchy vesicular rash on the elbows and knees is a massive clinical clue. You also need to watch out for refractory iron deficiency anemia, just like our patient Ananya had, as well as unexplained infertility or failure to thrive in kids. Missing these diagnoses leads to severe costs. The chronic inflammation and malabsorption of calcium and vitamin D can absolutely wreck their bones, leading to early-onset osteoporosis. Even worse, long-standing untreated mucosal inflammation slightly increases the risk of small bowel adenocarcinoma and the rare but incredibly serious enteropathy-associated T-cell lymphoma.
All right, let's bring all of this basic science, diagnostic logic, and clinical reasoning together into a high-yield package for your exams.
First, a quick clinical pearl for practical geographic management. Always remind your patients to watch out for hidden gluten in common products like soy sauce or hing. When guiding patients, especially in areas like the celiac belt, in northern India where wheat is a massive dietary staple, the transition can be really tough. Naturally gluten-free staples like rice, ragi, and jowar are excellent, but patients frequently and accidentally dose themselves with gluten hidden in bottled sauces and spice blends. So getting dietitian counseling early on is paramount.
Here's your ultimate high-yield board essentials cheat sheet. Seriously, take a mental screenshot of this synthesis, because these facts are virtually guaranteed to show up on your test. Remember, 1 peptide, 1 genotype, 1 flattened villous. You need HLA-DQ2 or DQ8. You need tissue transglutaminase 2 doing the deamidation. You screen with tTG-IgA paired with total IgA, and you confirm with a biopsy or EMA. Look out for dermatitis herpetiformis and treat with a strict, lifelong gluten-free diet.
We're going to leave you with this golden rule to avoid the most common high-stakes mistake in gastroenterology. Test before you treat. Gluten withdrawal before diagnosis is an easily avoidable error. So, the next time a patient presents with refractory anemia or chronic diarrhea, will you have the clinical discipline to test before you treat? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep this fundamental physiology and diagnostic workflow fresh in your mind for your next exam or ward rotation, and you will never miss a case of celiac disease. Happy studying!